The Arctic holds its breath when nature writes its cruelest stories. In the vast white wilderness of Svalbard, where ice stretches beyond the horizon and silence reigns like a frozen crown, one tale emerged that would challenge everything we thought we knew about survival. It was here, beneath the pale glow of the midnight sun, that a young polar bear named Nanook would witness an act so brutal it would carve scars deeper than the Arctic wind. What happened next defied the laws of the wild, transforming a cub's tragedy into a legend whispered across the tundra. The year was 2018, and the sea ice was retreating faster than ever before. Climate change had turned the Arctic into a battleground where only the strongest could claim tomorrow. Among the survivors was Siku, a powerful female polar bear whose amber eyes held the wisdom of countless winters. At her side walked Nanook, her 18-month-old cub, still learning the ancient rhythms of hunt and survival. Their bond was unbreakable, forged through shared meals and the warmth of her massive frame during the endless Arctic nights. Nanook was different from other cubs. His coat gleamed with an unusual silver tint, and his movements carried a precision that impressed even the elders who watched from distant ice floes. Siku had taught him well. He could track seals through breathing holes with remarkable skill, and his patience during hunts rivaled that of bears twice his age. Rangers who studied the region noted his exceptional development, whispering that he might become one of the greatest hunters the Arctic had ever seen. The Hudson Bay region had become a corridor of desperation. As the ice melted earlier each spring and formed later each autumn, polar bears faced starvation on a scale never before recorded. Mothers watched their cubs grow thin, while massive males roamed further inland, their hunger driving them to acts of increasing desperation. The delicate balance that had governed Arctic life for millennia was crumbling, and with it, the unwritten laws that had kept bears from turning on their own kind. It was during the third week of July when the unthinkable happened. Siku and Nanook had been hunting near the Churchill Peninsula, where the last remnants of sea ice offered hope for one final seal. The morning air carried the scent of open water and the distant calls of Arctic terns. Nanook played at the edge of an ice floe, his young mind still capable of finding joy even as the world around him grew more perilous with each passing day. From the north came a shadow that would haunt the Arctic forever. Kodiak, a massive male polar bear weighing nearly 800 pounds, emerged from the morning mist like a walking mountain. His scarred hide told stories of countless battles, and his eyes burned with the madness of prolonged starvation. For weeks he had wandered the melting wasteland without food, his body consuming itself as he searched for any source of sustenance. The sight of Siku and her cub triggered something primal and terrible within him. Siku sensed the danger immediately. Her maternal instinct screamed warnings as Kodiak's massive frame filled the horizon. She positioned herself between the giant male and her cub, her body language shifting from peaceful foraging to defensive readiness. Nanook, still innocent of the darker truths of survival, watched with curiosity rather than fear. He had never seen a male this large, had never witnessed the raw power that desperation could unleash. The confrontation began with a low growl that seemed to shake the very ice beneath her feet. Kodiak approached with deliberate steps, his massive head swaying as he assessed the situation. Siku responded with her own warning, a sound that carried both fierce protection and desperate plea. For a moment, the Arctic held its breath, as if nature itself was reluctant to witness what was about to unfold. Kodiak struck with the fury of a starving giant. His massive paw caught Siku across the shoulder, sending her sprawling across the ice. She recovered quickly, her own considerable strength allowing her to match him, blow for blow in the opening moments of their battle. Ice shattered beneath their combined weight as they collided again and again, their roars echoing across the empty landscape like thunder trapped in a frozen cathedral. Nanook watched in terror as his mother fought for both their lives. Her courage was magnificent, her technique flawless, but Kodiak's size advantage became apparent with each exchange. Blood began to stain the pristine ice as claws found their mark and teeth drew crimson lines across fur. The battle raged for what seemed like hours, though in reality it lasted only minutes before Siku's strength began to fail. In her final moments, Siku's eyes found Nanook's. The look that passed between them carried a weight that would reshape the young cub's understanding of existence. It was not just love, but a transfer of responsibility, a silent command to survive, to remember, and perhaps someday to return. With her last breath, she managed to wound Kodiak across his left eye, leaving a scar that would mark him forever as her killer. What followed violated every natural law of the Arctic. Kodiak, driven by starvation beyond reason, began to consume Siku's remains while Nanook watched from his hiding place among the ice ridges. The scene burned itself into the young bear's memory with the permanence of brands on flesh. For 3 days he remained hidden, surviving on scraps in the warmth of his mother's final gift, a small cache of fat she had stored beneath a nearby snowbank. When Kodiak finally departed, his hunger temporarily satisfied, Nanook emerged into a world forever changed. The ice where his mother had fallen was stained red, and her scent lingered like a ghost in the Arctic air. Rangers who later discovered the scene could barely comprehend what they were seeing. Cannibalism among polar bears, while not unknown, typically involved only cubs. The consumption of an adult female by a male was unprecedented in their records. Nanook's education in survival accelerated with brutal efficiency. Alone now, he learned to hunt with a desperation that bordered on obsession. His techniques became refined through necessity, and his body grew stronger as he adapted to solitary life. But beneath his developing skills burned something darker than mere survival instinct. In the quiet moments between hunts, when the Arctic wind carried familiar scents, his eyes would narrow with a focus that had nothing to do with seals or fish. Local Inuit hunters began to speak of a silver bear who moved through their territory like a shadow. His hunting patterns were unlike anything they had observed, methodical, yet driven by purpose beyond mere sustenance. He would appear at kill sites where other bears fed, watching from a distance, studying their movements and behaviors with an intensity that unsettled even the most experienced observers. The first winter after Siku's death tested Nanook in ways that would have broken lesser bears. Food was scarce. Temperatures dropped to levels that challenged survival itself, and the isolation pressed against his mind like a physical weight. Yet he endured, driven by memories that refused to fade and a growing understanding of what those memories demanded. Rangers tracking his movements noted unusual behavior patterns, including visits to the site where his mother had died, always during the darkest hours of the Arctic night. As spring arrived with its deceptive promise of renewal, the Arctic landscape began its annual transformation. Ice floes shifted and cracked, creating new hunting grounds while destroying others. Nanook, now approaching his second birthday, had grown into a formidable predator whose silver coat gleamed like polished steel beneath the returning sun. His body carried the lean muscle of a bear who had learned to hunt not just for survival, but with the precision of one who understood that his strength alone would not be enough for what lay ahead. The scent reached him on a morning when the wind carried whispers from the north. It was unmistakable, burned into his memory like fire against ice. Kodiak had returned to the territory, his massive presence announced by the fear that rippled through every living creature within miles. Seals disappeared from their breathing holes, Arctic foxes retreated to their deepest dens, and even the ever-present ravens fell silent. The giant male bore new scars from a winter of continued desperation, but his left eye still carried the mark that Siku had given him in her final moments. Nanook began to shadow his mother's killer with the patience of a hunter who had learned that revenge, like the perfect hunt, required timing beyond reproach. For days, he followed at a distance, studying Kodiak's movements, learning his patterns, understanding the rhythms of a predator whose size had always been his greatest weapon. The massive bear moved with the confidence of one who had never faced a true challenge, his 800-pound frame casting shadows that seemed to darken the very ice beneath his feet. The opportunity came during the fourth day of his surveillance. Kodiak had discovered a whale carcass washed up on a remote beach, its massive bulk promising weeks of feeding. The giant male gorged himself with the single-minded focus of one who had known too many hungry nights, his attention consumed entirely by the feast before him. Around him, other scavengers waited at respectful distances, unwilling to challenge a bear of his reputation and size. Nanook approached from downwind, his silver form moving like liquid mercury across the broken ice. Every step was calculated, every movement designed to bring him closer without alerting his target. The lessons his mother had taught him about patience and precision guided his advance, while the rage that had sustained him through the darkest winter nights provided the courage to continue where others would have fled. The attack came without warning, a silver streak that materialized from the Arctic mist like vengeance given form. Nanook struck Kodiak's injured left side, targeting the blind spot created by Siku's final blow. His claws found purchase between ribs, and his teeth sought the vulnerable neck that had torn his world apart. The massive male roared in shock and pain, his feast forgotten as he wheeled to face this unexpected challenger. What followed defied every expectation of Arctic combat. Kodiak possessed overwhelming advantages in size and experience, but Nanook fought with something that raw power could not match. This was not mere territorial dispute or competition for resources. This was justice delivered with claws and fangs, a reckoning that had been building since that terrible day when innocents died on blood-stained ice. The battle raged across the beach with an intensity that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Arctic world. Kodiak's massive paws struck like hammers, shattering ice and sending sprays of gravel through the air. But Nanook moved with a fluidity that turned the giant's size against him, darting beneath swinging claws and emerging to deliver devastating strikes to vulnerable points. Blood began to flow from both combatants, staining the pristine landscape with a price of vengeance. For the first time in his life, Kodiak faced an opponent who matched his fury with skill, his power with purpose. The young silver bear fought not just with his body, but with the accumulated grief and rage of 18 months spent planning this moment. Every dodge, every counterattack, every perfectly timed strike carried the weight of a promise made to dying amber eyes in the depths of an Arctic winter. The tide began to turn as Kodiak's confidence eroded beneath Nanook's relentless assault. Wounds that had seemed minor began to accumulate, sapping strength from the giant's massive frame. His movements grew slower, his responses less precise, while Nanook seemed to draw energy from the very act of combat itself. The scavengers watching from the periphery sensed the shift, their nervous movements betraying an understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Nanook's final strike came as the sun reached its zenith, painting the battlefield in brilliant white light that seemed to bless the moment with divine approval. He drove his claws deep into Kodiak's throat, finding the same vulnerable point where his mother's life had been torn away. The massive male's eyes widened with the sudden understanding that his reign of terror was ending, that the cub he had traumatized had returned as an instrument of retribution. As Kodiak's massive frame collapsed onto the blood-stained ice, a profound silence settled over the Arctic landscape. The giant who had violated the natural order lay still, his scarred hide testament to a life lived through violence and desperation. Above him stood Nanook, his silver coat darkened with blood, his amber eyes reflecting not triumph, but the completion of a sacred duty that had consumed his existence for over a year. The other scavengers approached cautiously, drawn by instincts older than memory to claim what remained of the feast. But something in Nanook's posture warned them away, a presence that commanded respect, even from the hungriest predators. He remained beside Kodiak's still form for hours, not in celebration, but in the quiet contemplation of one who had fulfilled a promise that had sustained him through the darkest period of his young life. When darkness fell across the Arctic that night, it carried with it the weight of transformation. Nanook stood vigil over the fallen giant, his breath forming silver clouds in the frigid air as the temperature plummeted below survivable limits for most creatures. But he was no longer the frightened cub who had cowered among ice ridges 18 months earlier. The Arctic had forged him into something new, something that carried both the gentle wisdom his mother had taught him and the terrible knowledge that justice sometimes demanded blood. The scavengers eventually retreated into the night, their hunger overruled by an instinctive understanding that this place had become sacred ground. Ravens perched on distant ice formations watched with intelligent eyes, as if they too recognized that they had witnessed something that would echo through generations of Arctic folklore. The whale carcass lay forgotten, its bounty meaningless compared to the larger feast of vengeance that had just concluded. As dawn broke over the Hudson Bay, painting the ice in shades of gold and crimson, Nanook finally moved. His steps carried him away from Kodiak's still form, each paw print in the snow marking not retreat, but progression. The obsession that had driven him through the darkest winter of his life was complete, but in its wake came something unexpected. Where rage had once burned like an eternal flame, a different kind of fire now flickered to life. And the months that followed Kodiak's death revealed the true measure of what Nanook had become. Rangers tracking polar bear movements began reporting unusual behavior patterns that defied conventional understanding of Arctic predators. A silver bear had been observed protecting smaller bears from aggressive males, intervening in conflicts that should have been none of his concern. Cubs separated from their mothers during the chaotic summer hunting season found themselves under the protection of a guardian whose reputation grew with each passing week. Local Inuit communities, whose ancestors had shared the Arctic with polar bears for countless generations, began speaking of Nanook in tones reserved for legends. Elders who had witnessed decades of polar bear behavior admitted they had never seen anything like the silver bear's protective instincts. He moved through territories that belonged to other predators, as if guided by some higher purpose. His presence bringing order to a world increasingly dominated by climate-driven chaos. The transformation was not without its costs. Nanook's body bore the accumulated scars of dozens of confrontations, each mark a testament to his willingness to stand between the strong and the vulnerable. His left shoulder carried the permanent reminder of a battle with 3 males who had cornered a mother and her cubs near the Seal River. His right flank showed the jagged lines left by an encounter with a desperate female who had mistaken his approach for aggression. Yet he persevered, driven by something deeper than mere survival instinct. Scientists studying the region began documenting what they termed anomalous social behavior among polar bears in Nanook's territory. Incidents of cannibalism, which had been rising steadily due to food scarcity, showed a marked decrease in areas where the silver bear was known to patrol. Mothers with cubs lingered longer at hunting sites, their anxiety visibly reduced by his presence. Even rival males seemed to moderate their aggression when Nanook appeared on the horizon, as if his very existence served as a reminder of consequences for those who violated the natural order. The Arctic itself seemed to respond to his presence. Ice formations that should have melted remained stable longer in his territory, providing crucial hunting platforms during the increasingly brief winter seasons. Seal populations showed signs of recovery in areas under his protection, their breeding cycles undisturbed by the constant threat of violence that plagued other regions. Rangers attributed these changes to reduced stress among all species, a ripple effect that demonstrated how one individual's actions could reshape an entire ecosystem. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation occurred in Nanook himself. The silver bear, who had once moved with a single-minded purpose of vengeance, now displayed a complexity of character that challenged everything researchers thought they understood about polar bear intelligence. He showed mercy to defeated opponents who submitted, yet remained ruthlessly efficient against those who threatened the innocent. His amber eyes, once burning with rage, now carried a depth that spoke of hard-won wisdom and an understanding of responsibility that transcended personal desire. The legend of the Silver Guardian, as the Inuit began calling him, spread beyond the Arctic. Wildlife documentaries featured grainy footage of his interventions, while conservation groups pointed to his territory as proof that polar bears possessed emotional and social intelligence far beyond previous estimates. Academic papers attempted to explain his behavior through evolutionary psychology and environmental adaptation, but none could fully capture the profound impact of a young bear who had chosen to transform trauma into protection rather than perpetuate the cycle of violence. As the seasons cycled through their eternal rhythm, Nanook's influence continued to expand. Young bears who had benefited from his protection grew into adults who displayed unusual cooperative behaviors. Cubs who had witnessed his interventions learned that strength could be used for purposes beyond personal gain. The culture of the Arctic was slowly shifting, guided by the example of one bear whose response to tragedy had reshaped the possibilities of what polar bear society could become. The whale carcass, where Kodiak had met his end, became a landmark of sorts, a place where other bears would pause in their travels as if paying respects to something larger than themselves. Researchers noted that aggressive encounters near the site dropped to nearly zero, as if the very ice carried the memory of justice served and consequences delivered. The Arctic wind seemed to whisper stories of the silver bear whose mother's death had sparked not just revenge, but a revolution in the way predators understood their place in the natural order. Rangers conducting their seasonal population surveys began documenting unprecedented cooperation among bears in Nanook's territory. Hunting grounds were shared with less conflict, mothers pooled resources to protect their cubs collectively, and even the traditional competition for mates showed signs of becoming less violent. The ripple effects of one bear's choice to become a guardian rather than simply another predator were creating changes that would echo through generations of Arctic wildlife. Yet beneath the legend, Nanook remained fundamentally changed by his journey from victim to avenger to protector. The cub who had played carelessly on ice floes while his mother hunted was gone forever, replaced by a bear whose understanding of life and death, justice and mercy had been forged in the crucible of the harshest environment on Earth. His silver coat, once simply unusual, now seemed to gleam with purpose, marking him as something unique in the vast white wilderness he had claimed as his domain of protection. The Arctic nights still carried the echoes of that terrible day when innocents died on blood-stained ice, but they also carried something new. In the howling winds and shifting ice, in the patient hunting and protective vigilance, the spirit of Siku lived on through her son's transformed purpose. Nanook had discovered that the greatest revenge against those who destroy love is to create more of it, to ensure that other cubs would never experience the trauma that had shaped his early life. Thus ends the saga of Nanook, the Silver Guardian whose journey from orphan cub to legendary protector reshaped the very soul of the Arctic. What began as a tale of unspeakable tragedy transformed into something far greater, a testament to the power of choice in the face of overwhelming darkness. The young bear who watched his mother die had every reason to become another predator consumed by rage. Yet he chose a different path entirely. The legend of the Silver Guardian continues to echo across the tundra, whispered by Inuit elders and documented by researchers who struggle to explain what they have witnessed. In a world where climate change threatens to tear apart the delicate balance of Arctic life, Nanook stands as proof that even nature's harshest lessons can give birth to hope. His story reminds us that survival is not merely about strength or cunning, but about the choices we make when faced with our darkest moments.